Okay, so you guys should be able to hear me. I am Elizabeth Glass. My contact information is elizabeth.glass@cbschmidtohio.com if you need to reach me for anything. You can definitely jump in the chat box today and ask questions as you see them fit for the session today. You should see my screen. Today we're going to be in Moxi, of course, and today I'm actually going to show you something to do with your listings and Moxi Engage. So right now you're actually in Moxi Engage. So that's your CRM, your client relationship management tool. Not only does it manage your relationships and help you culture those different clientele in from prospects to clients to closed, it also tracks and helps you watch your goal so that you can actually see where you're at with what has currently closed on the MLS and what's currently pending. So you can accurately see your GCI and the goal that you've set for yourself. So right now I'm in the goals section. To get to where I am, I clicked on Engage at the top in the top navigational panel. And then I've chosen the word goals here to click. Now to enter your goal for the first time ever, it will have an automatic box pop up. So it allows you to do that. If you need to change or edit your goal for any reason, if you take your eyes to the top right-hand corner, there's a little settings gear icon. Clicking on that does allow you to click on this GCI goal button right here, and it allows you to change it. Now, what I'm going to show you very quickly here is how this is automatic because it MLS. If you guys could do me a favor and please mute your phones, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So basically, this is automatic. It feeds from the MLS, which is wonderful because you're already doing the work of adding your transactions, buying and selling on the MLS side. You don't want to have to enter everything manually in here. So it does automatically pull things in on that 3% GCI. So you can track the things that you have accurately sold or been on the buying end for your client, and it feeds through right here. Now, there are some exceptions to that, which I'm going to review with you very quickly. Now, the exceptions I'm about to review with you are going to make you need to manually enter that transaction just for the GCI goal tracking. Now, first, before I show you that very quickly, I just want to break down what you're looking at in case you haven't been here. It shows you the percentage of the goal that you're at currently in comparison to what you entered as your end of year goal. It does break it down with the number of transactions and tells you some of your data here. Now, here's what I really like. It feeds in all of your data and it connects it to Moxi Engage. So if my clients are in Moxi Engage and I'm working them and I'm actually using the system as it's designed to, it's not only going to track my closed transactions that automatically pull in from the MLS. And as you can see here, the highlighted section on the left says close. It's going to break it down and tell me my information that I need to know, my data, my analytics, how many were buyers, how much was my average time to close, what's my close rate, my sellers in comparison. And all of this is actually interactive too. So if I were to click on any of this, it would actually change the data to what I was looking towards. But if you look at the right, it will actually show you the transactions that are totaled together for this accumulated area. So if I wanted to, technically here, I've got a transaction here for a Jenna Smith. I'm actually able to click right on that and it takes me into that specific transaction. So I just wanted to see show you how this accurately pulls things down. It also shows you what is active and pending, so that it helps you to focus on what you need to work on to get those deals to close. And again, if I clicked on that active and pending, and then I clicked on my buttons over here on the right, my highlighted blue section where the name is, it will take me into that transaction if I wanted. Now, it also does, in addition to feeding in from the MLS, it actually uses what you've entered into Moxi Engage. That's where it is beneficial because you have things that are not currently done in the MLS yet, but you want to be able to see those and track those as well as part of your cumulative goal. So here are my prospects. So if I clicked on the prospects on the left, I've got the transactions that are in the current phase of working with them currently. And again, it's the same concept of the active and pending where we're working on them, but these are my prospects. Now, if I add the three together, what is already finished in the MLS, so the houses I've sold and the houses that I've helped my buyer purchase, those feed in automatically. I actually am working these still in Moxi Engage, so they're not in the MLS. So it's adding these together. And then I click on my GCI forecast, and that is what my cumulative forecast, if everything closes, would be. So if I have my forecast in here, and my closed transactions, it's accurately pulling that data in to show me. My comparable average is really awesome because it helps me to have a healthy competition either with myself or really gauge where I'm at in my location versus my MLS. So if it shows you here, I have in here, it says four transactions completed and it tells me the average size, but look at this. It breaks it down between myself and then I'm comparing myself to my office. So those agents in my local office and those agents against my local MLS again as well. So it just gives you some of that data. Now, you might have some situations where the information of the transaction is not going to feed in because it is not a transaction based on that set 3% GCI. So here are some examples. I'm going to tell you some reasons or what you need to have completed in order for it to flow into here. And then if it doesn't fall into these categories, I'm going to show you how to manually enter it very quickly, even if you've already created the transaction, even if you already have an MLS number associated with it. I'll show you how to very quickly swap it over so that it's at least going to track the numbers for you here. So here are some criteria. It will automatically pull all of your sold listings as long as they meet the following criteria. Number one, the listing is associated with your agent MLS ID on the MLS. So your agent MLS ID has to be on the transaction in the MLS. Either the listing agent ID or the selling agent ID needs to match the ID on the Moxi roster account. So in your Moxi account, you have an MLS ID. So those two need to match. Your ID needs to match. You just need to make sure it's correct on Moxi and also correct in the MLS. So these are scenarios where if you don't see a transaction here that you think you should see, these are scenarios why you might not see it and then what you can do to rectify it so that you can. So for an example, if you're a co-listing agent, you might not see your listings pull automatically into Moxi. So that reason you'll want to do a manual entry, because if they do not have your MLS ID on the transaction, or even if you are on there as a co-lister and it's not feeding through automatically for you the way you want, you can very easily add that transaction if you're the co-lister. I'll show you how to do that. If you are representing the buyer, okay, so you're on the buying end, not the selling end who entered the listing into the MLS, you need to make sure that the listing agent includes your MLS ID on the listing in order for Moxi Engage to add it to your buyer side closed deals. So if I'm representing a buyer and somebody from a different brokerage does close out the transaction, but does not include me on the buying side in the MLS with my MLS ID, it will not obviously be connected. So you'll just want to make sure that that broker agent does make sure that your MLS ID is on that side, which you want anyway, because you wouldn't get credit for that transaction if it didn't happen. But these are just some scenarios where you might not see it pull up. Next, so not the agent MLS ID, but like the actual MLS ID on the transaction itself needs to be matching what you have in Moxi Engage. So whatever the specific listing number is for that specific property, in MLS, it needs to match what you have it engaged, obviously, because it wouldn't know that the two are the same if it's not. Next, the listing has to be closed. So that your transaction needs to be closed in closed status on the MLS. So if it's currently pending, it's not done yet. So it's clearly not going to feed over to your closed transactions. This is the section closed. That's what feeds in from the MLS. The rest of this is what you're doing in the Engage system. So it needs to be in the closed status. So if you closed yesterday, technically keys changed hands, but it's not reflected and updated, at least on the system in the MLS yet. It's not going to show yet until it is on the MLS. Next, if there is a correlating transaction in Engage, the Engage has to be closed as well. So example, if I'm in my Engage system and I'm in my people section, which I'll show you in a minute, the transaction that I'm working, that specific in that client profile, that also needs to be in the status closed, okay? So if it's currently in a pending phase or in a marketing phase, it's not going to show up here it needs to be closed here as well because we're matching the data. So obviously we're matching the agent ID number, the agent MLS ID number, the listing MLS ID number, and the status needs to be matched as well, which, to be honest, if you're doing Engage running through the flow system, you're going to close it anyway because that's part of your process. So that should not be a step that you guys miss. Very simply put, it needs to be sold this year. So obviously this is your GCI goal for this particular calendar year. If you do not see a transaction pull through, it's because if it wasn't done in this year, it's not going to reflectively show it. However, there are ways you can access previous GCI goals, etc., to see what you did in previous years if need be. Last, but probably the most recent and most relevant situation why you would manually enter a listing is if it's a rental. So again, as I mentioned, things are pulled in automatically on a 3% GCI. A rental is not that scenario, right? A rental is not going to be in the status of a closed property as far as a transaction is concerned. It's going to come through as the word lease. So it's not going to be pulling through automatically. So if you have a rental, you're able to very quickly put it in the system so that it's able to track it here in your goals when it will not pull in automatically from Moxi. So that's important too, because if I'm working with a seller and we're working on, a buyer, and we're going to buy a property, but the deals fell through and at the last minute they decide to rent, I can still be inside the same transaction and very quickly swap it from a purchase to a rental to make it reflect accurately here. Again, co-listed properties must be on the MLS as well. So your property needs to be there, even if it's a rental. Now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you very quickly. Those are the scenarios. Those are why you might not see it here. And if that's the case, and if you need it to pull over to show it towards your goal, it's actually very fast. It's one quick little step. You might not have realized how easy. What I'm going to do, please take your eyes to the top of the screen. We've got a navigational panel that says Agent, Dashboard, People, Calendar, Goals, and Campaigns. We're currently in the Goals section. I want you to hover over People and then click on My People. This is where your library is of all of the people that you have in your sphere. So your prospects, your sellers, your buyers, etc. Now it's going to load all of your people, but if you want to narrow it down just kind of like I did just there, I'm just going to go ahead and type in a name. I'm just going to use this last one that I had up as an example for a transaction. Okay, I'm going to click into that, but I just realized I want you to actually see the GCI goal and the number before I do this so you can see the change happen. So let me jump back into where I was. I'm going to go into Engage, and then I'm going to click on Goals. And I'm going to make sure that you guys see that number because I want you to see that change immediately. Now, clearly, I'm in manager mode. I need to get into agent mode. Clearly, if you have things feeding in from the MLS, understand something that it's on their feed cadence. So what that means is if something closes from the MLS now, it might take a couple minutes or it might take 20 minutes or whatever until the next push that they do out to receive it here. But a manual entry is instantaneous. Okay, so let's look at my goal here. 70%, and you can look at my number right there. So that's what I want you guys to see. These are my closed transaction, and take a quick little gander. We've got one on Smith Road, Housey, Royal, and River. When I manually enter a transaction, I'm going to be moving it from one of these phases to close. So you will then see it show up here. It will then reflect the number here, and it will also reflect the number here. So now that we've got that number, let's go back into that person by clicking on People, hovering on People, and then clicking on My People. Now, I like this because you can actually enter a listing from the get-go as a rental or as a manual entry, or you can actually change an existing transaction. So I don't care if your transaction is done and you actually have it closed, you can still go in and change it in our system to show up very quickly. We're going to go into just this random guy here. Okay, so here's the deal. When you've created a client, you've obviously got their information in the profile section, the activities where it shows your activity with them. If you've sent them newsletters, have they opened it? If you've sent them searches for properties, to search through your website for properties, it's going to show what they're doing here. It shows where they're favoriting or which properties they like. So all that amazing, great stuff is there. Where we're going to be at is right here where it says marketing plan. So on the left side, This is the type of transaction that you're creating for the type of buyer. So if I just created this and I just added her in here, it would have a pop-up box asking me if it's a buyer or a seller. If I've already, and then you would just click on it. Now, for this transaction, it would still count for a buyer. Even though it's a renter, there's only two different phases, buyer or seller. So for a renter, you're still going to choose the word buyer on the pop-up box. But what if you've already been, like most scenarios, people want to buy, and then at the last minute, they change their mind. We're going to pretend like Jay Bell was in the plan right here in the regular marketing plan. And he was going to go forward with the transaction, but he wanted to be on the buying side. So we're going to click on buyer. Now, this is the box that would pop up if I was entering him for the first time, just so you guys know. And then I would have to choose between one of these two. Now, traditionally, what we would do is we would add in our MLS number right here, right? So if they were a traditional buyer, I'm just showing you guys this so you guys can see it. Let me see, let me try this MLS number, 416. I'm pretty sure this is an old MLS number by now, and it's probably closed, but this is just a realistic scenario. So now what it's done is it's connected the MLS number to that transaction. So if it was a typical purchase, I'm going to go ahead and hit done. What would happen is it would close, and I would close it out on my end. I would say moved to, and we're just going to fast forward through these processes. We'll pretend like the transaction's moving. This is just to show you how you can go backwards if you needed to. If I was now going to be closing on this property with this potential client, I'm going to go ahead and randomly put a day in here. It's just going to move us to close transaction phase. So if you have this already existing, right, and you're like, why is my number not showing up in my goals? Because it's showing up as closed in the MLS, you have to come back to your transaction. It's not closed until it says closed. See how it still says pending? So I would need to make sure a couple of things. Does my MLS number match? So if I click on details, see how I've got my MLS number in here as well. Okay, my MLS number is there. Make sure that matches what's in the MLS. Make sure your MLS ID personally as an agent is in the MLS. So make sure those things match. And you'll need to make sure it's closed right here. Okay, so that's what we would do is we would close the transaction. Now, after you do this, hold on 1 second. I'm going to do close transaction. Please confirm yes. Okay. Perfect. Now, this is if you were going to send the transaction out, just so you guys know, as a just sold to your sphere, it would immediately do that for you guys here, just so you guys can see that's how that's done as well. So if you wanted to set people up on your just sold to your properties or just listed, you guys can do that as well. All right. So that's what you would want to do for the purchase if you were doing it to make sure your listing showed up on goals. But now what if we're at this point and we wanted to buy this property, okay? And this property no longer is something that we can work out with a purchase, but now we want to be a renter instead, or we're in the beginning of the transaction and we just know they're going to be a renter from the beginning. It's actually very easy. So what you're going to do, regardless of whether you are already working with them or you're just now entering this for the first time, when you're in the client's transaction, what you're going to do is you're going to click down where we are now. So in the transaction phase where we are, and we're in the details button. So again, I'm on the left side. I'm in the transaction. I'm selecting it here, right here, this blue section, and I'm clicking on the details button. Now, when I'm in details, all I have to do is go ahead and hit edit. And this is so fast and easy. Watch how quick this is, okay? Because right now, if it's a rental, in the MLS, it will not show up for me because it's not going to pull rentals in. So instead of having it be the status transaction type MLS, literally right next to it, all you're doing is clicking non-MLS. That's it. That's literally the only difference. It couldn't be any easier. Now, this information here is your information for that. So if it's a rental and they're renting it for $750, which is technically what you would have in there as your information, you could enter it here. But you can also enter it again later. I'll show you where we're going to do that. Now, it's still considered closing if we do it at $750 because that's the agreed upon contract amount that we're doing here. You can add your estimated starting date and close date, but keep in mind as well, all of this is going to be updated in the next stage. So we'll go ahead and we'll add an address here. I'm going to say 123. We'll pretend like it's Test Street, because I want you to see how this is going to feed through now when it comes to your goals section. And it just takes a second. Very simple. Okay, perfect. So right now in here, because we're working with it, let's say it's a rental, we would actually have a flat fee. See the difference here? When it's a purchase or we're selling the property, it's going to be that 3% commission. So again, if you have a different thing for your property, this is where you would change it. We would click a flat fee. And in this scenario, it would be the $750. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit done. And by the way, just because it's a rental doesn't mean you can't facilitate continuously using Engage through .loop if you're in Michigan and Ohio. Florida uses SAP files and it's not currently a connected process. But at this point, if I wanted to be right here and I wanted to create a loop in .loop and do the rental transaction there, we could do that very quickly by clicking on this button here. And it's going to then allow you to hit done. It's going to do a couple of things. It's now marking it as a manual entered transaction. And then it's going to allow you to connect it to .loop. Now, this particular account that I don't have connected to my .loop account, but if I did on this profile that we're looking at, my training profile, it would immediately create that transaction for you. Now, the great news is we have our transaction in here. So now Engage is going to track it for us because it's a rental. And then I'm going to go into my goals section here, and we're going to just let this load. Let me, I'm sorry, one more step I totally forgot, which is why this is important to go over, because this is exactly why people say to me, it's not showing up. Did you see the one thing that I forgot to do because I was talking to you guys? I forgot to close it. That's exactly why. I literally just had this scenario the other day. Okay, so I'm in here. I'm going to go ahead and say close transaction. I'm going to say my closing date is today. And we're going to do our commission rate. We'll pretend like it's a flat fee again, because it's not the percentage. Otherwise, they would take a percentage of the total. So we're just going to do the flat fee of $750. We're going to hit OK. Now, here's how you know you've done it correctly. It says it's now closed and it's now been added to your GCI goal. Okay. By the way, you can always take them back out. You can always delete a transaction if something happens to go wrong at the last minute, but it allows you to get it in there when you need be. Okay. So now that it's closed, I'm now going to go to goals. We're almost done. See how my percentage went up? That's done. And I actually have in my closed transactions on the left-hand side, I have my new transaction that I just entered. So for those of you who are working on a co-listing and you're not seeing it pull up, but you were looking at the MLS, you're seeing all of the data is correct, everything's matches for whatever reason, it doesn't happen hardly ever, but you have an ability to just very quickly, as you saw how fast it was, all I did was change it from non-MLS to from MLS to non-MLS to make it show up here. But now you're in control of your goal, even if the system doesn't pull it in for you. Now, the only thing I can tell you is we do have, we need some grace sometimes because people want things to be instantaneous. So if you have a $400,000 transaction going through the MLS and it's just shows closed today, and you check all of the data, you make sure everything matched, all the MLS numbers, all the agent ID numbers match. You've got to give it a little bit of time to plug in and push from the MLS, feed it into Moxi. If you manually enter it because you just immediately need to show that number to somebody for some reason, it's okay. You can do that. But when the MLS still pulls that transaction in, you're going to have a duplicate. And then all you'll have to do is just very quickly, you can watch what I'm doing here. The scenario I'm telling you should never happen unless for some reason you're showing somebody your goal for whatever reason and you needed to show it to them like in a meeting or a training. But if you had a duplicate for whatever reason, if it came in after you created a manual, it's as simple as clicking on that name right underneath where it has the blue. That's your clickable link area. Now for me to delete that transaction, it's literally as simple as this delete right here. As long as I'm on the left side, see how I now have my JBell buyer here? This is my closed transaction. I clicked on that. I'm going to say delete. I'm going to delete that transaction. You have successfully deleted this transaction. It's gone. I know it is because it's not here anymore. and I'm able to click on marketing plans. So let's just say a realistic scenario was that she was going to rent that property. We did all the things we needed to do when we got to contract point. And for whatever reason, they backed up, maybe because the water started flowing in the basement. We no longer wanted to rent that property. So all I had to do was just delete that transaction, but I'm still in my client here. So I'm not doing anything new. And I'm now going forward and making them a new prospect as well. So I can now make them a buyer, which again would be a renter if that was the case, or a seller. And I can continue to move forward with them on a residential property or a real estate rental as well. So it just makes it nice because it's only one time you're creating the profile, but the realistic life nature of how we have business today with things ebbing and flowing and changing, you're able to very quickly make some changes and engage to work with the scenario as it is at that time. Now let's go ahead and click on the goals section here. See how my number went back down? I removed that rental transaction. So now my percentage is back down, and under close, it is no longer there. So being really honest, it's super simple and simplistic. But it's just a couple of things you need to double check on your end. At this time, we're going to go ahead and close. I'm going to open it up to chat if you have any questions. Let me jump in and I'll answer anything that is for anybody, for the whole group. If there's any specific questions, I'll reach out to that agent specifically at that time for them directly. So if you have any questions, jump into that section there. But again, it's simplistic and it's pretty easy. And it's a reminder for those who don't have their goal, or maybe it's not where you want it. Because at this point in the year, you want to adjust it. You're just going to click on the little settings icon in the top right-hand corner. And then you're going to click right on that. And then you're going to click GCI goal. And then this is where you're able to come in here and change it based off the way that you need it to. Oh, it just refreshed my screen. I apologize. So that's where it is, GCI goal. And that's where we change the commission rate as well. If you wanted a tour to learn a little bit more about goals section here, you can click on that if you wish as well. Okay, let me see in here what messages we have. Reading a message here. It says I have 2 clients in my contacts that are engaged and buying a home. How would you run this through Moxi goals? Just one person, or is there a way to connect them in Moxi or other option? So I guess the question that I have is maybe there's 2 different people in here as separate. Eric, are you saying those are 2 different profiles? So like in Moxi Engage, let's say Beth had her own profile and Jim had his own profile and they became engaged. You definitely wouldn't want 2 different transactions unless they're specifically 2 different, like if they're both selling a house. To move into one, you would need to have different transactions, but you would want to work with one profile altogether. Let me run in here. I know that we can, he's asking if we can merge Moxi profiles. That's going to be, might have conflicting information, but let me just jump in really quick. Let's see what I get. I know at the bottom, if you wanted to remove somebody from Engage altogether, it's at the very bottom on the left side in the navigational panel. Let's take a peek. Yeah, no, we can remove a person from Engage altogether or copy it, but it wouldn't merge the 2, which is exactly what I thought, because the 2 transactions might have conflicting information. So if I was working with a couple, they both can have their both names on both of your profiles. Like if it was Beth and Jim, they're selling, each of them are selling the houses they were currently living in, and then they're getting married and buying a new house. They can have their names on all the transactions, but the transactions need to be different if they're different people, if that makes sense. But I can have as many transactions under Elizabeth as I wanted to. So if she's in here and I am in here as a seller and I go through this whole profile with her as a seller, let's see if it's going to let me click on it. If I do it as a seller, I'm actually able to create another transaction on her profile, which is what you're probably going to want to do, and say add transaction. And I now can add the transaction for the purchase with Jim. So as an example, this is her profile, right? She's engaged to Jim. Let's pretend like this doesn't say buyer, it says seller. We can do a whole transaction selling her property in her profile, but then I can then do what I just did on the top. I hit add transaction, and now I can put her in as a buyer, and I can actually put her buying transaction in right here. So if you wanted to do it that way, you could do it and just have the one profile and then just add multiple transactions onto it. But I want you to be thoughtful of something. When you're connecting it to .loop, it might get confused. I don't want it to get confused as to which transaction it is. So I would try it out first before you did it. But technically, if I was able to do it this way, I could have her selling transaction in here. She can come back and be a buyer. And let me be honest with you, that's the concept of engage. You're not going to create multiple profiles for one person. The intent here is to have everything on one profile. So hopefully that answers that. We can go into a little bit more in depth and detail separately if you have clients that you want me to look at. Next question is, would you recommend ASCs teach this to their agents to get them to add their clients into the people tab? Yes, but only under the scenarios that I mentioned, Stephanie. Great question. So ASCs showing your agents how to do this is perfect. That's what we want. That's why we're doing it today on Moxi Monday as well. So I want you guys to be empowered to add your transactions. But if it's a transaction that's automatically going to flow in, make sure that they know it's going to come in on their own. So if all the IDs match and their ID, MLS ID matches, their agent ID matches, and it's a residential property that's selling or buying, that's going to come in automatically. I just don't want agents to double do it and wonder why their numbers double. If that answers that question, and that makes sense for you guys. So yes, please make sure people know how to do this in the situation in which they would need it. If it's a rental property, if they're a co-lister and it's not pulling in. Okay, great questions. Well, hopefully you guys learned something new today, and hopefully it was pretty simple for you. On that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. This will be recorded and uploaded to our Schmidt video classroom. So at any time you can access this, and it will also review all of the different criteria that you need in order for it to come through. So if you do in the future, let's say in a month from now, you see something that doesn't pull through, jump into that Schmidt video classroom. You can, of course, ask us personally. We can look it up for you. However, if you wanted to quickly have a recap from this video, going through those scenarios, you can very quickly hear the different things I mentioned and then see if that follows for your situation, and then make that very quick change, making sure those IDs match, and you'll be all set. On that note, we're going to go ahead and end up. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful and blessed rest of your week. Thanks, guys, so much, and good job with jumping into Moxi, and I look forward to more time with you guys in the future. All right, guys, have a good one. Have a wonderful, blessed week. Bye-bye.